My name is Charles Justin from the Justin Art House Museum, and we are hosting an exhibition called The Infinite Loop, which is curated by Justin Andrews, who's sitting on my immediate left here. And there are 6 artists involved, 5 of whom are sitting next to me, and I'd like to introduce them starting from my left. So we have Lars Breuer from Germany, we have Sebastian Freytag from Germany as well, Justin Andrews, who's also an artist in the show, and on my right is Stephen Bram, and on my far right is John Nixon. So to get the ball rolling, I thought the first question I would direct to Justin. So Justin, could you tell us what is behind the exhibition? What are the ideas which are driving the concept behind the exhibition?
Well, you could start with the title of the show, and the title of the exhibition is The Infinite Loop, and I thought it was a suitable term to kind of characterise what's happening within the exhibition. The way I see it, it's like a conversation or something that's constantly moving or evolving, or something that's cyclical and ongoing and open-ended. So it's like a loop or a dialogue that is forever moving forward. And in a way, I see the communication between the 6 artists as being kind of like an open-ended conversation. The way that all the artists work, the way the artists come together, the way the show and the works within the show all relate to each other, seems to be about this kind of open-ended dialogue that could be now, could be in the future. The exhibition itself is like a proposition for a show of many different types or kinds of variations upon a theme. So it's there's kind of like this infinite sort of possibility for variation. So that's why I called it the infinite loop, because it's evolving and it's a model for a show. But it's also, there's a kind of loop there as well, because it also points to this idea of abstraction supposedly being hermetic or self-referential or kind of purist or of itself. And whilst in some ways that is true, abstraction is also very much influenced by the world that it's seated within. I think the power of subjective response is very valuable when looking at abstract work, reductive work, or whatever you want to call it. Even if the answers aren't given directly, there is always going to be a kind of relationship between the work on the inside of the museum and impulses or stimulus that comes from life lived outside of the museum. So there is definitely a kind of loop that's forever evolving, but also nourished by interpretation that comes from outside of the work and the museum itself. So there's a kind of loop there that's infinitely sort of changing and rolling and moving, but it also feeds upon real world information. Yeah.
Right, thank you. John, you would be sort of the elder statesman of this group, which is said as a compliment. So could you explain which works you selected to be part of this show and how you feel they are part of the show, and perhaps you could also talk about your relationship with the other artists who are in the show.
Okay, well, Justin as the curator chose the works that were included in this exhibition. He's known my work for a long time, and there's many different kind of works to choose from. So he chose 2 works that he would feel fitted in with what the other artists' concerns were. He wanted a monochrome painting and he wanted a constructed painting. So in terms of the year now, these are both quite old paintings. The orange monochrome painting, I began to do work like this in 1995 when my daughter was to be born. And I wanted to choose something that would be simple and kind of easy to do, but with also having to look after a child. The other painting is called academic painting. It's a kind of version of a Russian constructivist painting. I can't exactly remember, but I think it's around about 1986. And so this is my contribution to the exhibition. The works of the artists are mixed through the spaces of the House Museum, and so that the individuality of the artist is presented in different spaces. So we're presented alongside one another in different contexts. And I've known Stephen for a very long time, longer than I've known Justin, and the German contingent I've known also for quite a long time now. So it's very, I think it's a very good moment to bring these people together and to bring these different individual aspects of geometric abstraction together in the House Museum.
Lars and Sebastian, one of the things about the two works you've got in the exhibition is two of your works have very strong text embedded in the work. How do you see that fitting into the overall theme of the exhibition?
May I just start to talk about my textbook? My contribution is a poster work downstairs in the garage, which is a lovely additional space in this house museum in the collection, because it's in between a gallery space and a kind of public or normal ordinary space. And Justin actually asked me for a wall work with a typeface of Xerox, and it's a work that's called Xerox, so it's copying the word in itself, and that's the title, and that's basically what the work looks like. It's just a repetition of the same word. It's a brand, and it's a kind of it's the innovation of the copying machine. And I use always the same typeface for my works. I've once chosen a couple of years ago a certain typeface that I since then always use in all my works. That makes it for me very simple to decide. I don't have to figure out with different typefaces and cuttings and all the things. I just have one typeface that goes on and makes my artistic practice in this case very practical. And this is a typeface called DIN. It's a German typeface from the 20s, so it comes from the early beginning of modernism, one of the early typefaces from modernism time. And this is a typeface that is used or was invented for public communication. So this is a typeface that is in Germany, maybe also I think in Australia and many other countries, used for highway signs and for street signs. So this is a kind of public, a typeface that meant to be a public language, a very simple, ordinary typeface. And of course, by choosing this kind of typeface, I also refer back to the modernism time, to the beginning of the modernism time in the 20th century, the Bauhaus invention and all this tradition. And so this is kind of my reference back to history, and maybe in a way it's linked back, maybe it refers a bit in your curatorial choice to the other works from Guido Münch. On the one hand, the paintings that have the very strong impact from suprematism, and of course John Nixon's work. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a kind of reading modernism paintings and reading the tradition of modernism. I think this kind of word painting fits very well in this discussion of abstraction. But it was basically a curatorial choice. I didn't come up with that. It was, I think, just its approach also to ask us both for artistic works with typefaces. So, but this is my explanation why I think it also has a very strong link back to the other works and to the approach of reductive and abstract painting, and I think it's a bit different in Lars' case, but I think it follows the same direction.
Maybe my contribution to the show Infinitive Loop is resignation. This is the word I wrote on the wall, but it's not a printed word, it's a painted word. It's actually a wall painting I designed for the show. I was also asked by Justin to develop a work for the show specially, and I'm using self-developed typography, which is a little bit maybe working as a counterpart to Sebastian's found object, so to say, and it's I developed it so that I can use it on the wall directly. So I tape it and develop it on the wall directly using tape, sealing tape, and so it becomes this kind of constructivistic element. And so there are connections. Some people even say that it's very much connected with this kind of propaganda or advertising style from the 20s, if they see the works. For me, it's important that the work stays in between an abstract ornament on the wall. You can stand in front of the work and see the work as a more or less black and white pattern, so to say. And maybe if you step back, then you notice that there are characters, and then you notice that there are characters which fits together, and then you notice that there is a semantic. But on the other hand side, if you don't look on the semantic, it directly flips back and becomes a black and white abstract pattern, which is on one hand side also the background for a work by Justin Andrews, which is hanging on top of my colored or a dark wall painting.
One of the things I find wonderful about that work is that Justin's work is actually embedded in the wall, the painting that you prepared. So it's almost like a dance between two artworks. And the way the point on the square lines up with the midpoint of your text.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the two works, although they were produced independently, actually come together almost like a single work. And so, Justin, your work, which has colour and it's got curves, it's quite different to the work that Lars does. So it's almost like a counterpoint. How did you arrive at your sort of thinking with regard to how your work was going to actually fit within his work?
Well, I think it's fair to say that everybody's work in the show, or both two examples from each of the six artists are different. It's true to say that, but it's also true to say that they are related at the same time too. So in that way, there's a sense of democratisation across the whole exhibition. It's almost as if the 12 works in total go together to produce a kind of statement, or to produce a feeling or an atmosphere. All these things, like a recipe, come together to create this kind of impression. And the juxtaposition of my work over the top of the extension of Lars's was never going to be a problem. It was always going to work. Lars and I corresponded and discussed it and reached a compromise and made an agreement on that. And I actually think that that's like one of the interesting aspects of the exhibition, where works can be read in relation to others. It's a very, very important point. And I think it happens throughout the exhibition, directly in the case of my work, and Lars is forming a backdrop for the presentation of mine, but also indirectly in terms of shared use of colours or forms or typography, composition, pattern, all of these kinds of elements or principles, formal, conceptual, textual or otherwise, they're all shared things. They're kind of like public property in some way. Nobody has complete ownership over any of these kinds of elemental building blocks. So if all of the works use those, then there's going to be a level of harmoniousness throughout the whole show, regardless of how different the work seemingly is. So that's a real commonality throughout all of the work. And the other one is this idea of artworks having purchase points in the world outside of the museum, and I talked about that before, but even a work like John's monochrome, reduced as it is, orange is public property. Orange is a universal colour. Every single person who looks at that work has a subjective interpretation of the colour orange. It will remind or evoke something for everybody. So even though the work is very reduced and very beautiful for that fact, it has this kind of open-ended meaning or ability to trigger meaning, and a subjective response on a personal level is justifiable, completely justifiable when looking for a meaning in a work like that. And it's the same with every work. There's something about every work that triggers an association, and that is, if one has to kind of try and find meaning in the work, that's what it is. It's interpretation.
So talking about interpretations, one of the interpretations I have looking at your work, Stephen, is that all the other works to me appear to be quite two-dimensional, and your work has a three-dimensionality about it, you know, with that sort of perspective embedded in the views. And so I think, to my view, those two works sort of sit a little bit differently to the other works. What are your thoughts about that idea? I think you made the comment that you thought your works had a sort of stood out a little bit differently.
Yeah, I jokingly said that my painting, well, it's got a lot of different colours in it, and I said it was frivolous, like a French painting amongst all the German paintings. But I don't quite know how that happened, because my painting used to be very kind of severe, and I never used three colours for years and years and years. But recently I've started to use more colour. And now I wish I hadn't. I think there's a couple of things about that use of space. One is it's meant to refer to the space that the work is in a way, and so through that use of space, which is no specific space, but which has got characteristics of, just a spatial setting, the work has the same sense of partaking of a public language as all the other works do. The other point I'd like to make is that the illusion of space in the work is created by the use of is it sort of in a way a byproduct of the fact that the works are oriented to points outside them. So again, to refer back to what Justin was saying about the relationship, and some of the other other artists too were saying about the relationship between the works and their context, or the museum and its context in broader society. That's always been a concern of my work through that device, by means of making the works refer to points in space outside of themselves. To add to that, I'd like to say, from my point of view, all the works, different works in the exhibition, in various ways refer to the idea of the ready-made or the pre-existent, or and to me, when you think about what a ready-made is, what a found object is, in the broader sense, all it really is a category that's publicly recognised. So in that sense, a ready-made doesn't have to be an object. It could be a word, it could be a colour, it could be a spatial arrangement, it could be just something that is readily recognisable and capable of being placed in one category. And I think that's another thing that all the works, another way of understanding the mechanism by which the works in the exhibition speak to each other and speak to the space that they're in.
Yeah, because the works are really quite diverse. Although they all fit within the sort of category of abstraction or even geometry abstraction, it's fantastic how quite different they all are and how they all still fit together as a sort of family of works. And I find that fantastic. So Justin, can I ask you, how did you go about choosing which artists were going to be part of this exhibition? What were your connections with the artists and the artists with each other, and how did you come to select the 6 that you did?
Well, over the years I've had some very nice experiences with everybody that's sitting here. Exhibiting alongside, or making shows for, or working for, or talking with, sharing ideas. These artists in this room here are some of my closest colleagues, and I think part of making art is not only the individual practice but also establishing context. And put simply, an exhibition like this is the ideal context that I would like to see my work in. These are the artists that I respect and I like working with, and I think an exhibition, to curate an exhibition and to organise a situation where the artists can be in the same building. Also Guido. That's ideal. That's ideal. And that's definitely something worth working towards and making happen. And you're intrinsic in that happening as well, Charles. So that's another rationale behind the exhibition, is to establish that context and to kind of make an exhibition which represents the conversations that happen and the experiences that have happened. I mean, yes, I had a solo exhibition in the independent space that a Konsortium ran. I've curated group shows in the past in which John and Stephen have been involved in as well. There's been a whole lot of independent projects and initiatives and etc. where these artists, where I've worked with them before. So this exhibition, once again, to talk about the idea of the cyclical, is another project on top of that, and it builds on those relationships and those friendships and those understandings. And there's other lines that can be drawn as well across the 6 artists. It's not like I'm sort of in the middle. And I mean, even this idea of me curating the exhibition is, I'm a little bit dubious about that, for want of a better term. I really feel as though I've sort of been maybe sort of like an organiser or a facilitator more than a curator, because yes, I did select some works to trigger the exhibition and what goes on within it, but it's very much an even playing field, I feel. So
it's maybe important that Justin mentioned that we met each other not only here in Melbourne some years ago, but we already met years ago, maybe even a decade ago, in Düsseldorf. That Justin had a show with us in Düsseldorf, and also Stephen, and this came from a third side, and we saw John's show in Düsseldorf at Zeit, I think. And of course we saw this show and we were impressed by his work, and this is very long ago, and since then we in Düsseldorf and in Cologne we follow their works since years, and so it's very nice that we have the possibility to come together here again, and let's see where the next step will take place, will be, and I'm looking forward to do this, and I'm looking forward to work here together with them.
From the discussions we've had, because the impression I get is that abstraction is not sort of very strong in the public consciousness today, and I have the feeling that there's almost like an underground
Yeah, the world is the world is small, and we are somehow experts in our fields, because you know your colleagues. Of course, many you don't know, and you're always surprised if you meet someone and you wonder why you have not known or followed his work for years. But very many you know, and you follow him, and it's interesting to see the next steps of the colleagues. Of course, yes.
So John, I heard that early in your career you travelled quite a bit in Europe and showed in Europe and got quite well known there. Was that an unusual step for an Australian artist?
Yes, it probably was, but I was always interested in the bigger picture. I wasn't so interested in just being a local artist like many of the people who live in Melbourne are. And I always had a way to make my work that didn't need a studio and it didn't need the facility that one would normally use. I was able to travel to Europe and take some works with me or make works in situ when I arrived there, because you take your ideas with you wherever you go, and then it's just a matter to find the materials, and you're always working with other artists and colleagues so they can help you. And it was always in my mind that the transportability of what it is you do is the most important thing. I was never interested in, say, having the big trucks come, getting the things into the shipping container, shipping the work off. That wasn't going to work. That would cost a fortune. So it had to be done in a way that you could do it yourself, a simple way, so that you could still have what you want but not have the costs involved. And I think, this is all before the internet. So the internet is the sort of world travel of the present time. But then you had to physically take things or make things and just travel on a plane by yourself. And it was able to be done. And point two is that the world was open to people from other places. When I first started to show in Cologne with the Gallery Sophia Ungers, Sophia had a kind of United Nations in her team. She had people from Moscow, from Copenhagen, from New York, from Australia then, and she had also some German artists, and Swiss artists, and French artists. It was a very interesting situation. So if you could actually come and bring your work with you, there was no problem, because there was no problem with any of the things involved. And that's how I was able to start working. And I've always worked through artist to artist, that I'm friendly, and you work from artist to artist, and then the ones who respect what you do, they say, would you like to do something? I'll introduce you to my gallerist, and blah, blah, blah. And that's how come my network grew and developed. And then I could bring my other Australian friends into that network and bring my European friends into the Australian network. So I was one of the first people to start to multiply this notion of possibilities. And I still do that. And I still do that, and I still show all over the world.
And I think the same goes for you, Stephen, as well, don't you?
Well, I mean, indirectly, I was, although I was first introduced to Lars and Guido and Sebastian through another artist, I met that other artist through John.
Right.
So certainly, John has through John I've met lots of people over the years, so and I think John occupies a pretty central position in that regard, for a certain cohort of Australian artists, I guess. I'm not very, it's been a long time since I've been very active in exhibiting anywhere outside of Australia, partly because I've got young children and I'm hoping at some stage that situation might change, but at the moment, not.
No.
Yeah.
And Lars and Sebastian, the German art scene has got a very strong tradition of abstraction. Would that be a correct statement to say?
Sure. I mean, the European art scene has developed a lot of abstract art in the beginning of the 20th century, and Germany, of course, played a kind of role in that the whole movement. Of course, yeah. But I don't know if we are really related to German art in particular. I think we always see our interest is first in art in general, and it's not about any specific kind of art, and then it's not about a specific national orientated art scene. So I think probably our work is a bit like, as you can see it, especially in this show. I think that the clear, obvious references are not at all to German abstraction. It's more to Russian, to the Romantism, to the Russian and Eastern development in art in the beginning of the 20th century. So I think that is a very strong impact. And if you look then back in the kind of tradition of abstraction with Bauhaus that I already mentioned, Bauhaus wouldn't be like that kind of interesting if it hadn't been an international network. Like Malevich traveled there and wrote this famous book, although he never really taught there, but he was like physically there, and he made Gropius and all the others, and Kandinsky was there. So there was a kind of fluid situation where artists used to travel from Moscow to Paris and way back from Paris to Moscow. And luckily, maybe Germany was in the middle, so we were in a situation that some great artists passed by and dropped some good words and some good ideas. And I think it's the same situation right now, that we're just in between travel, and I think ideas travel in a way and the artists travel in a way. And although we are sometimes not able to physically to travel, like we're traveling via internet now, we're traveling via sending catalogs or making research. So I think the first thing that I recognized about the artists from Australia, what Johns and Stevens and Justin spoke, was more probably about the internet and about publications. So sometimes you just grab a piece of an invitation card, you somewhere see a reference in a catalogue that is in a group exhibition, and then you follow these tracks. And this is a kind of random situation in the beginning where you just follow names or rumors, and when I first discovered then all the things in the internet, it was very, very thrilling, because suddenly it was possible to search all these names, and there were some more images visible. And now we are lucky that we are able to meet all these artists, and that we are invited to come here and follow more of these tracks and learn more about the situation. But I think this is a very natural way of discovering art all the way through the 20th century until now. So I think this is kind of typical what happens.
Yeah, I think we share we share an international language. You know, so it's not so localized. I mean, there's always going to be some localization in no matter what you do, wherever you come from. But we share a language that we can all converse with easily and readily. And that's the beauty of it, and that's what makes it large, and that's what makes it strong.
Yep. And this is the point that Carolyn makes in her text, this idea of the European centre and the Australian periphery. It just doesn't really apply anymore. I mean, there's really no this idea of the centre for a particular type of art is.
Yeah, there's no School of Paris or
No.
New York School anymore.
No, the School of Google.
There's no
School of Google.
There is no place to be, so to say. You can be wherever, and you can travel, and you can find your way however you want.
On the other hand, there are certain and this to refer to what you were saying before, Charles, about abstraction maybe not being so fashionable as it might have once been, or it being out of style, but at the moment perhaps it is. I don't know, but if there is a reason why it's not, if there's a reason why it's not pushed as much as some other kinds of art are, it might be precisely because it's not, it doesn't represent a particular nationality or a particular group, precisely because it's international. It's not, if it's about identity, it's about identity in a much more subtle way than most art is. If it's about national identity, well, it's certainly about that in a more subtle and more nuanced way than most art is. And I think that we mustn't forget that most art serves an agenda of that kind, you know, that you're an artist who represents your nation, or, you know, so in that way, it's also quite political what we do, I think.
Like the Esperanto of the...
Well, I don't think it's, I don't know about Esperanto, but it's suggesting other categorical frameworks, not nationality, for example, you know.
Well, I think that one of the things the world's experiencing today is this sort of tension between globalisation, where everyone becomes part of the one humanity, and localisation, where everyone is sort of seeking this sort of individual identity or national identity, and you sort of, it's a battle, isn't it? And so I can understand that. Can I just ask you another question? Each of you, at one time in your careers, had a sort of an artistic activation, like you did with Konsortium, and I think, Justin, you had in your career with certain initiatives which were trying to make things happen, and I think Stephen and John as well. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit as to what motivated that, and what do you think you achieved with it?
Well, when I did my Masters, I had a series of very nice conversations with Stephen. I interviewed Stephen on his practice and the history behind it and certain particular aspects of it, and I found those conversations to be very inspiring. And also, I have to say, in the late 90s, I saw before I knew Stephen, I saw some of his exhibitions in Melbourne, and I was quite struck by the beauty of those paintings, and that was a really an important moment for me.
You can also formulate it negatively, and you mentioned that abstraction has a kind of German history, but on the other hand side, there was a time when Sebastian and I met Guido that in this time abstraction was not playing a big role in Germany, and our motivation was very much to be against the things you can see in all the galleries and all around us, and we thought that our work is somehow defined as a counterpart to the other things you see, and this very much sharpens our practice, so to say.
So was that the motivation for starting Konsortium?
This was a motivation to start the exhibition space, Konsortium. This was a motivation to build something like a group, and this was a motivation to get in contact with artists abroad to share the same ideas, because I think the group, we thought that our group is much too small, and it was very important for us to bring artists from abroad to our place, to show the people in our place that we are also working on important things, so to say. That's what we thought, and but it was somehow the engine driving us. So it was also a negative energy pushing us, so to say.
And as long as there was no one else doing this job, no curator, no gallerist, no collector who brings all these things together, the information supports these, we have to do it. And that's the reason why we just did what we want to see. We just invited the artists that we would like to see. We'd like to see the artworks and people that we like to meet. And that was a natural way to get in touch with these people, inviting them and providing a space. That was the only thing that we were able to do. We weren't able to pay anything. We were just able to provide a space and keep it clean, that the artist who was invited came there and was free in whatever he would like to do and would like to show. And the negative form that Lars just mentioned, I think that is also a kind of important thing if you think about abstraction. As long as it's not a common language, as long as abstraction is always like a small part in the art world. Abstraction can also be a kind of expression of a negative feeling. Like you go in a field that the people promise you this is a dead end, this is a wasteland, and this is thrilling to discover a land where everybody expects you to fail. And that was also like one of the reasons to start being interested in all these things, because it was a lonely field, and then you're inspired and you're enthusiastic about that. And on the other hand, you do something that everybody don't like, and it's the other way around. So I think we were all driven, or we three were driven by two motivations. On the one hand, we were very enthusiastic about the things that we discovered and the things that we liked. We were really fans, and we still are big fans about all the arts that exist in this field. And on the other hand, we were quite full of hate and frustration. And if these two things come together, this is very powerful, because it gives you a lot of energy, negative and positive energy. The one drives you forward, but the other one as well, because you just want to conquer the world, you just want to conquer the art scene, you want to fight against something. It's always good if there's a kind of so-called enemy. It's also good to think, yeah, it's good to make the space. It's good to show that there's another art scene parallel to a kind of, sometimes you get the feeling there's a kind of art system that rules the world. And if you can be have a small art space and you can compete with that, or you can do something to say like, no, we can prove there's another art scene and it's global wide, and there are people who are enthusiastic in that and do a serious work, this gives you a good feeling.
So, tell me, Justin, or any of you, has there been a major abstraction exhibition by a public institution in Australia?
Lost me on the last bit of the question.
Well,
in Australia,
wasn't there in 1970 or 68? Yeah.
No. Look, there has been. The point is, because it's not at the forefront of our lips.
Yeah.
There have been.
More recently.
Yeah, look, the Malevich survey exhibition that I saw at the Stedelijk a few years ago.
No,
was
but
about
in
Australia.
Australian art, or art in Australia. There every 10 years is another exhibition on some museum level of abstract art from Australia.
David Pistorius's Monochromes exhibition.
Well, but he also did a history of Australian abstraction, I think,
yeah.
from 1935 onwards, something like that.
Yeah.
And there are exhibitions, and there have been, since the field exhibition, which is what you were referring to, in '68. I've done a number of independently curated exhibitions which survey some forms of abstraction, and it's out there. I mean, I think this kind of negative thing that you're talking about is also something that drives me, and that there are two art worlds. There's ours and there's theirs. And theirs is not the one we're interested in, the one about narrative, the one about figuration. So we just basically get on with our job and we play our code.
And it's always narrative and figuration in the service of, Australian history.
Yes.
In Australia.
Yeah.
So it's always nationalist in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, that was also a big factor in the starting up of Store 5 as well. That's a space that John and I were both involved in the late 80s and early 90s, that showed, almost exclusively abstract artists working on it completely, but that same idea that you're just referring to, John.
Yeah, and from your generation. It
Yes.
was founded by Gary Wilson and Kerry Polonus, and I was older, but I gave support to that idea, and I also showed in that space. But there have been many different things throughout time in Sydney and Melbourne, where groups of people have got together in the
inverted topology was very
well, inverted
successful.
topology was another one. The thing is, there.
It's a collaborative group.
Yeah.
But not so many institutional though.
No.
Which is not a bad thing at all.
No, but the Gallery of Snow in Sydney was set up. I was one of the people initially involved in Snow. Was set up completely to deal only with abstract and non-objective art. That was the first moment when there were, and that Snow I think now has been going 15 years. That's kind of remarkable. there's a different leadership group now than there was initially, and I retired from my role there after 5 years or so. But that was a good initiative, and that initiative is always able to be made. It's always just asking to be made. You have to get the right people who want to do it, that's all. But there's lots in Australia, there's lots of young people working within abstraction now, and I find that great. You know, not only on the geometric level, but also on the kind of organic abstraction level. There's lots, so I think it's really very positive.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, that's also around the world. It's not only some local thing, it's around the world that younger people are now taking on abstraction to counter, in a way, all the nationalism that's coming up again.
I think one of the things that drove abstraction in the first place was a sort of like a philosophical movement to sort of counter a lot of the totalitarianism. So it was quite idealistic in many ways to, as an art movement, to sort of seek a sort of degree of sort of purity and sort of post-nationalism and internationalism. I just find a lot of abstract artists are sort of very sort of idealistic and sort of quite intellectual and cerebral about what they do, and seems to be one of the drivers behind what they do. They're just not there to create beautiful objects, but each object has got a lot of thought behind it, and so.
Yeah, but I think I found it always quite interesting that it's like this. I think it's not essential to abstract art that it's intellectual or that you need to know so much. But all the artists that we met through the years, they are all on a very high intellectual level. Everybody of these artists has a very good library, and so I think it's just something that probably happens to you. Maybe also because when you are working in that field and you are not like picked up by the market and you are not driven by production, you also have maybe like a bit spare time of reading some good books.
But also, if you think about, like, it's a really obvious point for me to make, especially here. But I mean, if you think about the history of non-objective art, it's like 100 years old, really, and which is a relative blink of an eye, if speaking in historical terms. So I mean, one thing that is very satisfying for me is to know that the work that I make is happening within a historical time frame that's actually really quite short. Like this form of art that I make, it's new. It really is new. Even if it may not seem like it today, it actually is if you were to zoom out, historically speaking. And that's exciting to think that, say for example, in 100 years' time, if by some miracle any of my work still exists, my work will be seen as being made in a time when it was still relatively new. So I can't help but keep my eye on the work being made in the present tense, but also the work being made in a future past tense. This is the way that I have to see my practice, and that's one reason why I make it. And so that's why I put so much energy into work that I make, because I realise I'm making it not just for my time.
But it's funny that you mentioned this, because I see it the other way around.
Wow.
Yeah,
I like that my work is old and connected with such a big history, which is not starting in 1940, 1912 or 1909 or something. I like the idea that it's connected with a nearly not ending history, and I think it's very simple for me to prolong the history I'm based on, at least a little bit, I hope. So this is driving me.
How, Lars, do you mean the history of art in general, or do you mean
art in general, paint in general? I very much like this classicistic idea, for example, and they refer, of course, to older movements, which again refer to to all the movements, and I would not stop with this non-figurative, or I would not start with non-figurative painting, but there's very much I admire in the romantic paintings. There's very much I admire in of course Renaissance paintings, and this gives me a lot of energy. I try to bring somehow in my small paintings. And
in a way, you could argue that, or it's a way you could argue about abstraction and monochrome painting, that it is very essential. So, and if it's an essential approach towards painting and art, then it could be argued like it's a Platonic thing. Like a monochrome painting could be seen as an ideal Platonic image in a way, if it's possible to say that. But if it's then linked back to this Platonic idea that we are dealing with essential things, then it gives a total different perspective. Although I agree that all the techniques and materials that we work with, the appearance of our work are very contemporary, and they're going to change over the years because the kind of paints, the kind of materials are going to change, and new materials are discovered. So the kind of surface maybe changes all over the years, and it might seem differently in 100 years. But there's a kind of essence maybe that goes through all the art developments over centuries, and that is also a nice way to understand abstract painting in specific. That it's also driven by essential ideas, and this is also, I think, a nice interpretation if we think about the title of the show. This infinitive loop. It's not only something that drives our generation, or like we as living humans. That is something that an infinitive loop could be the repetition of basic ideas, or the repetition of idealistic items that are in a repetition over centuries, that come back, that comes back from the past, and they just go on and on and on, and we are just in between. And so it could connect us back to it's always easy to say, like, go back to the Egypt pyramids. It's a very essential form, and a monochrome is also a very essential form. So this is very basic, so to say, but it explains maybe the idea of this connection of art over centuries.
But isn't that one of the problems? Is that everyone's trying to pigeonhole or put things into a box, because there are some realistic paintings that are actually dealing with abstract ideas, and then there's some abstract paintings who actually are dealing with real things.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Also in this show, it's very diverse in this show. If I mention, because Guido is not here now, but Guido Münch's work are very much related to representation. All the things that he does are not inventions of abstract ideas. He just finds forms that he repeats. Although the idea that you, Stephen, mentioned of the ready-made, of course, has a link back to representation. So I think you cannot divide the representation art then the figurative art and the abstract art. That clearly, I think they are shared philosophies behind them.
I agree with you, but isn't there a thing about abstract art that it's art in which the question of reference is much more open? You know, in a figurative painting, the idea is that there's a clear reference to something outside it, whereas with abstraction, the idea of what the reference is much more. The reference can be withheld, and I mean, to me, what the first definition I've heard of abstract art was that abstract paintings a painting isn't of something, and that immediately grabbed my interest, and I think that idea of deferring reference is having some interest in reference, precisely because we're working in abstraction, is really important. I think I can't speak for everybody in the exhibition, but I think it might be important for everybody in the exhibition, that idea of reference.
I like the sentence that an abstract painting is not about something, but yeah. But what about text then, or what about
Yeah.
this in between? Of course, you have a very strong semantic content then, but it also just might also just be a starting point.
Trigger.
Or it can be
Semiotic trigger.
an end point. I don't know. It's nice if it's also a flipping in both sides.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, absolutely.
But although your work, for instance, although it might not be about something, but it does have a very strong allusion to space.
Yeah, but no specific space.
No, I understand that.
And also an illusion is also a real experience. It's also another,
Sure, but it might be as specific. But when you look at, well, I can only speak for myself, but when I look at your paintings, I see space. So I see something.
Yeah.
Like you didn't paint something, but I see something.
Yeah, but it is completely non-referential.
Yeah.
It's using an illusion, but an illusion is not a reference.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's an illusion. It's a kind of a physiological or neurological fact or perceptual fact. In the same way that a circle is a perceptual fact, or rectangle.
Yeah. But that's the thing about abstract painting, isn't it? That although it's not representing something, but you've created something which does actually generate that sort of, in the viewer, a response, and they get something out of it. They see something there, don't they?
I don't know that it's true to say it's not representing something, but it's not representing anything specific. There's no necessary sort of linguistic relationship between the painting and the. I mean, I guess there is in the case of a circle. There's coming back to this Platonic thing you were talking about before, Sebastian. You look at a painting of a circle and it refers to every circle or all instances of any kind of circularity.
But it's also of itself.
It's also a thing of itself. There's that great Sol LeWitt quote, the quote that a painting of a line is not a line, but painting of a person is not a person, but a painting of a line is a line. So there's also that other thing, that the thing is the thing itself as well.
But it's nice to be free of that aspect that it needs to resemble something.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily does it have to look like a tree or like something. But of course, you can always say art is about something. That is something that you could always argue that has all the arts in common. That is kind of aboutness, because always in itself it's about itself or it's about the art history. And this is of course something that's driven by this exhibition a lot. That this deals a lot with art history. So in the end, maybe it reflects history. But I think it's only one way of seeing it. It's an option, and as an artist, it's an initiative moment to discover that world that it's not necessary about. In the end, maybe it's again about, or like in your whole career, if you see all the works in from a wider distance, then it's again about something. But as an initiative moment, it's great to have this freedom that it doesn't necessarily resemble something. It's necessarily about something. It doesn't necessarily reflect something. It can drop off all the things, and then you come to this kind of very nice Ed Reinhardt moment where he just reduces everything. If this is not art, this is not. If you reduce everything, then you come to the essence. Then you come to maybe to art, but not without pointing. Not with pointing and saying this is art, just without saying this is not what I do. This is not what I do. This is not what I do. And this is a kind of freedom, saying no.
I think it's a hopeless cause. Trying to contain how your work's seen or interpreted. I think representation is unavoidable. I think it's really interesting how open representation actually is. In fact, I think it's absolutely vital that the work is representing something. Of course it's representing something. I mean, it has a function to play. It was produced to represent an idea, even if whether or not it's literal or worldly. This is actually a secondary kind of concern. The work was made to solve an idea or a problem or an issue, or it's made to illustrate a concept that's usually come from between two pre-existing works. And this is just the nature of a kind of continuing productive practice, and representation is not an issue, interpretation is never an issue. They're vital kind of outcomes and links in the production of a work that starts from the artist in the studio to the exhibition environment, through to the viewer who looks at the work and interprets it in a way that they can. This is absolutely vital. It's actually not an artwork if that doesn't happen. So
the way I see abstract art is that I see it as a sort of physical manifestation of an idea.
Absolutely perfect. No problem with that whatsoever.
And the thing about ideas is that so many people can respond to ideas in different ways, and I think that's what happens when people look at an abstract work. It's sort of, it has this capacity for a multiplicity of interpretations.
It's just that abstraction doesn't quickly stand up and step forward and say exactly what it is about. And I think that's examples of that throughout this exhibition.
But I think with representational art, a lot of times the artist was actually saying something which was actually hidden behind the actual representation. So in some ways it was abstract as well. Okay, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and we'll hopefully see how the public reacts to your exhibition and many of the ideas you've expressed today. Hopefully will flow through with their engagement with your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.